time to talk to the Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce, and he's the Acting Prime Minister as well right now. To take us there, he was the Prime Minister in Washington talking to SBS about climate change and the net zero plan he's working on.
We're making a plan, and that plan, I believe, will address the concerns that Australians have about such a big type of change. Change can be concerning, and I want to give them a plan that enables them to go, OK, that's what they're going to do. I can work with that. I can see my future in that. I can see the future of my town, my region in that. And that's the assurance that Prime Ministers, Deputy Prime Ministers, governments want to give. And that's the way through.
Barnaby Joyce, welcome to the program.
Thanks for that, Spearsy, here from Walker Road.
Good to see you there. Can you confirm, for starters, are you working with the Prime Minister now on a plan for net zero by 2050?
Well, obviously there are discussions happening. I mean, it'd be absurd to think that people are not having discussions, but ultimately we have to know the process as well. And my party room, the Nationals party room, is absolutely part and parcel of that, and discussions will be taken back to that party room. We look at it through the eyes of making sure that there is not an unreasonable loss of jobs, or any loss of jobs in regional areas. We've got to remember, this is the area where we have the mining industry, and this is the area we have the agricultural industry, and it's not just those farms, it's not just those mines, it's the towns that are attached to the commerce of those industries. It's the hairdresser, it's the tyre business. These people also have to rely on the Nationals to make sure that we don't pull the economic rug out from underneath them. And if we look at what pulling the economic rug out looks like, then it's something I'm sort of perplexed as well. There's not more discussion about it. What's happening in the UK and Europe with energy prices? Six-fold increase in 1 year, 250% increase in the last since the start of the calendar year. A few days ago, 850,000 people losing their energy provider, and a real concern over there about their capacity as they go into winter to keep themselves warm and even keep their food production processes going through. And as quoted by The Guardian, so you don't think it's some right-wing rant, that says total chaos.
Well, they have a gas crisis in the UK and parts of Europe at the moment, that's the reason for all that. But just coming back here, are you, to your concerns there about regional communities, are you seeking to have agriculture excluded from any net zero target?
Well, I'm not going to go into the particulars of what, of any sort of discussions, but what I can say is it's whether the commerce of a town is excluded, whether the loss of jobs is excluded, making sure that we take people with us and we don't replicate the obvious chaos that's happening in Europe, and we make sure that we keep not only our mining industry, because you've got to remember, fossil fuels are your nation's largest export. And if you take away your nation's largest export, or is to affect them in any way, then you've got to accept a lower standard of living.
So are you saying no coal jobs?
Accept the government. The government will have.
Are you saying there should be no coal jobs lost? Are you saying there should be no coal jobs lost? Is that the bottom line for you?
Well, not by reason of domestic policy. I mean, what international markets, if people say the world's moving on from it, then you'll know that, because there'll be no ships off Hay Point in Queensland, no ships off Gladstone, no ships off Newcastle, and you can assume when that happens that the world's moved on. But currently we have record sales at record prices, and we have England reopening coal-fired power stations because they can't keep the lights on.
But it's pretty hard to see how you get to net zero while protecting all the coal jobs, isn't it?
Well, do you just go up to families and just say, sorry, you don't have a job, and that's it? And then we go to the places where they spent their money, the clothes shops, the accountant, the tyre business, the corner stores, and say, well, sorry, there's no more money in Singleton, and there's no more money in Rockhampton, or we've taken away the money, and it's affected towns. Well, you've got to be mindful of that. That's what a prudent government does. And of course, if you get it completely wrong, then the whole economy is rocked, as it is in Europe and as it is now in the United Kingdom.
So I just want to be clear on this, because, as I say, it's pretty hard to see how you can agree to any net zero 2050 or any time if you're demanding the protection of all coal jobs. This is the bottom line for you. No coal jobs lost.
Well, it's not the bottom line. As I said, I'm not going to go to the particulars, and I do credit your astute and acerbic process of trying to see if I do. what I can say is, if the world, you believe the world is moving on from coal, and if that's the case, there won't be any demand for the product. But and of course you clearly understand, the listeners understand that that's our biggest export. If you start shutting down your biggest export, the government has less money. So when you want money for more pensions or for the NDIS or for schools, hospitals, the ABC, then you have to accept that we've made a decision that we're going to bring in less money, so there's less places for the government to spend it on. It's simple as that. You can't just keep borrowing money and thinking that that's non-ending. Everybody else looks at it and economically says, well, hey guys, Australians, how do you pay for this? How do you pay us back? Well, what product are you selling the world that the world wants? And if you haven't got that product, well,
yeah,
you're in strife.
And I'm just trying to establish what your position is here. I mean, as you say, the world is moving on, right? Coal, the world will stop using coal at some point. Do you agree? And how can you protect those jobs indefinitely?
Well, let's work that statement out. If it does, people will stop buying it off us, and that's
So
the progression of things.
Shouldn't you be helping transition the industry now and those jobs in those regions?
Well, that's part and process of anything. And technology moves on, and I've got no problems with that. But to make a statement, the world's moving on from coal today, is not right. It's just not right, because we've got the highest prices and the highest volumes in the sale of thermal coal. And as I said, because they've completely botched it in the UK, unfortunately, they're having to go back and recommission coal-fired power plants to keep the lights on. And
but don't you need to plan for the future? I mean, isn't this your job, to plan for the future, to help these regions
yeah, absolutely.
adjust?
We plan for the future. That's why we went into the nuclear submarine contract. We plan for the future. We make sure we do, but we do it with our eyes wide open because we have to focus on the economy. We have to focus on the capacity to bring in money. We have to focus that the reliance of the Australian people.
So is it your fear that setting a target,
the billions and billions of dollars of revenue and the billions of dollars in royalties, you have to make sure that you don't just, if you're going to just switch it off, you have to say to the Australian people, as the Labor Party should, because they want to shut down the coal industry, okay, this is how the books are going to work. So they have to show the costs. So they have to drill that out. Now,
that's what you're trying to establish now. Sorry. So I'm just trying to, this is what you're trying to establish now. Are you saying setting a target, a net zero target, would accelerate the closure of coal? And is that something you're not willing to do?
Well, I suppose there's many ways to look at how you achieve a net zero target, but I'm just telling you the economic facts. I mean, it would stand. It's just arguing against the bleeding obvious that if you shut down our major export, which is fossil fuels, is the biggest. It's equivalent. Our beef exports are less than 40 days. 40 days of our fossil fuel exports. Your barley exports are less than 3 days of your fossil fuel exports. It's like fossil fuels, iron ore, daylight. Our Australian economy is completely different to the economies of Europe, which are exporting pharmaceuticals or motor cars or Boeings in the United States.
So it doesn't sound like you're very keen on the idea at all. It doesn't sound like you're very keen on this net zero idea.
It's what I'm not keen on sort of one-line glitzy statements by people such as Mr. Albanese or Mr. Bowen, who don't actually then say, and this is what the cost is, and this is how we'll do it.
No, I appreciate that, but you're in government, and it doesn't sound it doesn't sound like you are at all keen on anything that's going to hurt coal industry jobs.
No, it's a little old bush accountant saying that lots of clients have ideas, but if you sit down with them and say, okay, that's your idea, let's prudently go about this, because otherwise you're going to get yourself in more strife than the early settlers.
What about farmers who are already doing pretty well out of soil carbon, including in your electorate? What's your view on carbon credits and the potential benefits for farmers?
Well, look, carbon in the soil is just a very good idea, because it is how you increase the productivity, the soil retention, the fertility of the soil, and it varies. I mean, if you go out west, I'll tell you the truth. If I want to get greater carbon sequestration, I should pull over that forest. There's a dry sclerophyll forest over there, and plant perennial summer grasses, maybe digit or buffel grass if it grew here. It doesn't. I know, bambatsi or something, because that absolutely sequestrates more carbon. But if he was to suggest that, the environmental movement would lose their mind. But it's a scientific fact. So all these things have moderations. I remember bringing this up with Penny Wong. I said, well, that's just a scientific fact. There's a thesis on it. I can take you to Dr. Anderson. Says,
are you in favour of carbon farming? Are you in favour of farmers making a buck out of this?
You look at... Well, it's not just farmers. I mean, farmers are incredibly important, and I'm one. I was mustering cattle yesterday, and we managed to get 2 trucks bogged, but they're in the yards at the moment. But it's also the town. Like, you take New England, 12% of my electorate are farmers. Incredibly important. I'm one of them. But that means you've got 78% that are not. And that 78% also needs to be heard. And see, you've got to understand the main street in Singleton, the main street in Gladstone, what's happening up there in Townsville, what happens in Mara, what happens in
And you're saying
Emerald,
there's nothing in it for them. There's nothing in carbon farming for them.
Well, you got to make sure you got to make sure you protect them. A lot of carbon farming, it's if you just lock up areas, then of course they don't run. If you're just going back to I don't know, rangelands. Now, carbon sequestration, the more you increase it, the more, in many instances, the more you have to develop the land. For instance, in dairy country, it's about 16%, incredibly high. In the Western Range country, it might be as low as 1 to 4%.
All right, so
and therefore you need a high improvement.
Doesn't sound like you're sold on carbon farming as a great benefit for those regions you're talking about.
I am, but all these things, they're not binary. They've got to take into account the temperance and understanding of what those conditions are. I've no problems with carbon farming. I've no problems with biosecurity offsets. But you say, well, that's blanket. You say, well, no, you've got to take into account what happens in the towns as well. You've got to be mindful that your constituency.
Okay. And some of your colleagues are divided on this. We know there are those who are adamantly opposed to any net zero target. There are those, and we see some of them in the paper today again, Michael McCormack, Darren Chester, who, as long as regional jobs are protected, do want to sign up to net zero. How do you bridge that divide?
That seems like a perfectly plausible position. I've read the total quotes of Michael McCormack and Darren Chester, and they take into account exactly what I'm saying, the caveat of making sure we look after our people. And that seems like an incredibly sensible thing to say. Make sure you look after your people.
Just
see, if I went, as I said, you got to paint this in pictures so people understand. If I said, look, the way we're going to have a carbon mitigation strategy in Sydney is to shut down 3 lanes of the Harbour Bridge, shut down the Gladesville Bridge, shut down the M2 and the M7, and I think we're there, folks. And you'd lose your mind. You go, that's outrageous. And so you get it. You've got to think of how it works across the board. Because, see, in regional areas, we are actually reducing our carbon emissions. We're doing it. In your urban areas, they're going up.
Some of the divisions...
just got to be, and we played this game before with the Kyoto Protocol, where basically we used to own the vegetation. Then we woke up one day and we didn't own it. We didn't get paid for it either.
All right.
And so we're cautious. And if you want to suggest what you're going to do in the cities to bring down carbon emissions, we're all ears. We're going to listen to that as well.
All right. Just on the divisions in your party, though, Darren Chester has told a couple of colleagues, he told me as well, that he's taking a break from the National Party at the moment, not quitting at this stage, but he's taking a break. He's fed up with you not reining in George Christensen and Matt Canavan with some of their comments. What do you think of MPs taking a break from the party room?
Well, look, it's the National Party room is the most democratic organisation in that federal parliament, more democratic than the Greens or the Labor Party or even the Liberal Party. And in the past, who's a good mate of mine, Kevin Hogan, sat on the crossbench. These issues and these issues happened before, but I'll address the George Christensen thing. Now, George Christensen's retiring from politics, and I do talk to George, but this idea that somehow you can just go up there and demand that he sits, that he no longer talks, or I don't know, put the hobbles on him, gaffer tape his mouth up. That's not going to work. And in a nation like what Voltaire said, I think, well, it wasn't actually Voltaire. It was I can't remember the lady who summarised Voltaire's.
We'll leave that there.
But you can say what you can. I mightn't agree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. Now, is that principle now gone?
All right. Will you have a chat with Darren Chester, try and solve his issues and concerns?
Well, we have a party meeting every Monday.
Okay. Just a couple of other things. A lot going on in the foreign policy space, the meeting of the Quad, the new AUKUS partnership. You've, in the past, described China as the greatest threat Australia faces. Why is that, and what should it be taking from all of these movements in the strategic sphere?
Well, we always judge any person or country by their actions. And obviously our job is to keep the freedoms and liberties of your children, your grandchildren, to the same extent that you had them. And it's not just the actions of China, and they go without dispute. What's happened to the South China Sea, hacking of computers, incarceration of the Uyghur people, access roads into India, incursions there, other sort of territorial statements, the threats to Taiwan, the people who've gone off the street, just basically been whipped off the street in Hong Kong. Of course we've got to be mindful of that, and to ignore that is a foolish thing to do. But the best way to bring about peace and have peace in our region is with a comparable deterrent. And it's not just for us that we need peace. The Malaysians, Indonesians, everybody needs peace in this region. Right. And it's not just the Chinese that are becoming more overt, it's the Russians. You can see the actions of the Iranians. Australia has a job to do, and first and foremost, the role of government is to keep their people safe. And we don't want war. Australians don't want wars. We don't want to go to wars, especially the protection of Australian soil. So we need strong allies, and the AUKUS gives that a reinvestment in a platform in interoperability that can keep people safe and keep us in a region of peace.
Final one, Barnaby Joyce. Earlier this year, you said you'd fight for the Murugappan family to be allowed to return to Biloela. You've been acting Prime Minister for the past week. Few get that sort of chance in their lifetime. What have you done in the past week to help with that fight?
I've had to. Well, we also have a cabinet system of government, and I've had discussions with previous ministers. My views don't change, and they surround the fact that the girls were born in Australia. And
did you raise anything this week with the minister?
People know my views. And
you're acting PM. Did you express those views to the minister? He made a decision this week that keeps them out of Biloela.
Look, I'm aware of the decision, right? And I'm not going to go into any discussions or otherwise whether I might have had with ministers or not had with ministers. That's my right. Once you start doing that, people will stop having discussions with you.
All right. Barnaby Joyce, thanks for joining us this morning.
You're welcome, David.